Welcome to No Alter Egos, the place for conversation without the mask. I'm Trll Kennedy, your host, and we are broadcast live every Monday at 2 p.m. on WHPB 98.5 The Wire in Pine Hills, Florida, as well as WUVS 103.7 The Beat in Muskegon, Michigan. We also, and this is just in case you missed the live Monday broadcast, we have a Tuesday 3 p.m. rebroadcast on WVBH LP Power 105.3 in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And for those who happen to miss any of the live broadcasts, we have a YouTube companion podcast, which is the entire podcast, but on video, that drops on Tuesday as well at 5 p.m. So every Tuesday at 5, if you happen to miss all of the live broadcasts or the re-air, you can catch our Tuesday YouTube companion, which will be out forever. So if you want to go back, rewatch your favorite episodes, whatever the case may be, it'll be available on our YouTube channel, 5 p.m. every Tuesday on the No Alter Egos podcast. Welcome back to everyone that's been listening in. To everyone that's new, welcome to No Alter Egos. We talk about the latest in current events, sports, news, politics, whatever the case may be. If it's moving the needle, then I'm going to talk about it here on No Alter Egos. I also do my best to try and keep things free of that corporate spin that you usually get on traditional media outlets. The point here is to have honest conversations about what's going on and how it could possibly affect you throughout your life. Now, this week, we have another really great show coming up, some really hard subjects to talk about, including these two new police shootings, one of Patrick Lyoya in Michigan and the other of Qadry Sanders. This was back in December in Oklahoma, but the body cam footage was just released this past week. We're going to kick things off talking about those, why this still seems to be happening, why even though there have been protests and all sorts of things, why is it that police officer behavior, especially when it comes to just essentially executing black suspects, has not been curbed at all. The long and short of it is lack of punishment or any real measures to curb that kind of violence. But we're going to get into just a little bit of what happened with these stories to kick the show off. We're also going to be talking about the huge bombshell that dropped this past week, which was the leak from the Supreme Court of the intent of the Supreme Court in a majority opinion to essentially overturn Roe v. Wade. This is something that is 50 years now in the making, ever since Roe v. Wade was made as a decision by the Supreme Court, which legalized abortion at the federal level. There has been a legislative and even a spiritual fight for the last half century to try and get it overturned, and it looks as though those efforts may finally reach their fruition, as it was leaked this past week that the Supreme Court is essentially planning to overturn Roe v. Wade. We're going to get into that, how this all came about, and what it means moving forward for women inside of America, at least when it comes to abortion access and their rights to plan their own families and make decisions regarding their own bodies. And finally, we're going to wrap the show up with a look at some of the legal roadblocks that may stand in the way of building a sustainable future for our climate. These treaties that have been entered into by different nations with different fossil fuel and energy companies are now coming to the forefront as it's being realized around the world that they stand in the way of any real progress, as those industries have really embedded themselves into the root of government and made it so that, almost like a tick, once they're burrowed in, they can't be removed without causing some kind of great harm. So we're going to get into some of those treaties, what they are, what they entail for the future, and how it is that we can maybe either circumvent or put a stop to some of them and move towards a climate sustainable future, towards a greener energy future. So that's what's coming up on our show today. Of course, I am Trll Kennedy. As I said earlier, you can find me on Instagram at Trll Kennedy with no I, so it's just TRLL KENNEDY. Same thing on TikTok, just with an underscore, so Trll_Kennedy on TikTok. To find the show, you can find us at No Alter Egos on both Instagram and Facebook. You can also find us on YouTube, as I mentioned earlier, at the No Alter Egos podcast. That's our channel. Like, share, and subscribe if you do happen to come across it. If you're listening to this live, as I said, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. is when we do the YouTube companion video, and you can find it on YouTube at the No Alter Egos podcast. Before we get things started, though, I also want to give a shout out to the show's sponsors. We do every week: Born Saint Clothing and Merchandise. The world makes us sinners, but we are born saints. For more information on Born Saints, you can find them on Instagram at brn.saint or at www.trllkennedy.com/shop. That's www.trllkennedy.com/shop on your mobile or desktop browser. Without any further ado, though, let's get the show started. Welcome back, and buckle up for another great hour of No Alter Egos. So our leadoff story this week takes us back into really and sadly familiar territory. As a black man living in America, it's something that I've been made painfully aware of for years, really, with Amadou Diallo when I was a kid, not really understanding what was going on, but just seeing that, they shot this dude up. And as a kid, not fully grasping it, but knowing inherently that it seemed as though something terrible had happened, something unjust had happened to this young man. And then, of course, from there you have Oscar Grant, Sean Bell, and many other examples throughout the 2000s. And then in my adult years, it was really just brought back to a forefront with the killing of Trayvon Martin back in 2012, and so on and so forth throughout the years. We could go on and on. Eric Garner, Michael Brown, the list is almost endless of people, unarmed people, who have been killed by the police, especially black people, black men. But that also includes black women like Sandra Bland. You know, there are so many people that have fallen victim to police violence in this country with, to this point, almost no justice that gets served. In almost every instance, including the ones that I mentioned, the police, even though there's video evidence, especially in the case of like an Eric Garner, where there's evidence of Officer Daniel Pantaleo choking this man out while he says, "I can't breathe," like those little last gasps that he's taking his final breaths on earth. We see it over and over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where I had to make a conscious decision for myself not to watch those videos anymore. You know, when I was younger, I used to share them because it seemed as though a lot of my white friends just weren't believing me. The black people were always upset, and white folks on my timeline, a few would say something, but the majority were silent when it came to this issue. And so I would share the videos like, yo, I don't know if y'all think it's like tall tales that people are telling, but this is really happening. This is a real crisis. People are actually dying out here in the streets. And if we're silent about these things, then it's allowed to perpetuate. It's just like a cancer. If you do nothing to treat the cancer, it just metastasizes and metastasizes. And I think now to the fact that even in the year 2022, despite all that's happened, we had the summer of protests in 2020, even in the middle of the lockdown, following the murder of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin. And we saw another reconciling or reconciliation, another reckoning with the issue of police brutality and violence, where officers feel emboldened, almost entitled to take the lives, especially of black and brown citizens, with impunity, without any fear of punishment. And it's because historically they have not been punished or held accountable for the taking of black and brown lives in this country. It just happens. They corroborate each other's testimonies. There's tons, I guarantee you, especially when it comes to fatal shooting, there's tons of officers who have lied on the behalf of other officers. And so it brings us back into this familiar territory where here we are several months now into the year 2022, and we have two more egregious cases of just ridiculously over excessive police violence, where it seems almost on purpose. And it's such a shame that this is even still going on. But the reality is that if there is no change to the system, you know, if we're not going to be able to dismantle the system, then we have to be able to change and modify the system so that officers do not and cannot live above the law. But if there's no change to the system, then what continues to be perpetuated is that officers can encounter black people and feel emboldened to escalate the situation, to terrorize someone in their that's in their immediate purview, and then to take their life. And they know that they're going to get a few weeks of paid vacation, an investigation by their peers. And unless it's egregious, like the shooting of Walter Scott, where he was shot in the back as he was attempting to run away, then they're going to get not even a slap on the wrist. They're going to get a look, it was justified, get back on your shift. That's what's going to happen. We think of even the case like a Botham Shamjan, where he was killed inside of his living room by Amber Geiger. And the woman only got a 10-year sentence for a blatant murder. She was convicted of murder in Texas and got a 10-year sentence. And so over and over and over and over and over again, I personally think that our country has a fetish with like black trauma porn. Like, this country seems to get its rocks off on videos of black people dying. And that's one of the big reasons why I even stopped watching and sharing those videos. I stopped watching also just for my mental health. I don't think it's good to see black people getting killed over and over again. I don't need the videos to know what's going on. And so I've made a promise to myself, and it stuck to it very well over the past few years, to stop watching police execution videos, because I know what's coming, and I have still perused a few, but I always stop myself short of watching the fatal shot or shots being fired, because I just don't want to see it. With Patrick Lyoya, I did the same thing right up until he put the gun to the back of his head because I knew the next second was when the fatal shot was coming. And I accidentally broke that rule this week in watching the execution of Qadry Sanders by the Oklahoma Police Department back in December of last year. Now, the two officers in question have since been fired. They have also been charged. And get this, I don't know if you've seen this video. I would encourage you not to watch it, but I can give you a brief description of what happens. And in fact, I'm going to tell you the whole story so that there's full context. There was a protective order. This young man, Qadry Sanders, appears to have violated that protective order. He went over to someone's house who had the protective order against him. In the wrong, to be sure. Does this warrant a death sentence? No. There was also a call, though, that a gun had been waved inside of the residence and that one of them wasn't being allowed to leave. Once again, now you're escalating a situation. Does it still call for you to be executed? No, only if you are putting someone else's life in danger in terms of like you're seen brandishing the gun or threatening someone. The officers show up to the situation and someone exits the house. They're already a bit on edge, obviously, because of the nature of the call. Now, this young man, Qadry Sanders, who once again, while this is a rough situation, he then goes out through a back door. That's where the initial confrontation that we see from the body cam footage takes place, because we don't have a lot of the footage leading up to it. What I do know is that, and one of the reasons why I gave you the full recount is because I didn't have that. And so after getting the full recount, it was like, yeah, it was a tough situation to begin with, but it still does not justify what those officers did to this young man. Nor does it justify the fact, and this is one of the things that I was just mentioning before I kind of jumped off onto this tangent, it doesn't change the fact that they're only being charged with manslaughter, albeit first-degree manslaughter, but they're only being charged with manslaughter and not murder. And if you've seen this video, then you know that they murdered this young man. Murder carries intent, and premeditation and forethought doesn't have to be days of planning. There's been tons of legal precedent set where it's been shown that the forethought and malice that goes into a premeditated first-degree murder charge is as short as a few seconds. If only a few seconds before you took someone's life, you decided that you were going to take their life, that is premeditated first-degree murder, right? And it seems to be stripped away completely when it comes to police officers, because I guess they work in this occupation where they may have to use their guns. They're allowed to kill a little more wantonly. It's really hard to get a first-degree murder charge against a cop while in the line of duty. If Laquan McDonald, who was shot up 16 times by Jason Van Dyke, can't receive justice, it's going to be hard for anyone to receive justice when it comes to being a victim of police violence. But let me get back to this situation at hand, or the video at hand. This young man, and what we see at the start of the body cam footage, is that he pops out from behind a fridge with what is clearly, and this is, even though the body cam footage isn't, full on 4K, you can clearly see it's a baseball cap that's in his left hand. He steps out from behind the fridge. The officer's saying, "Hands, let me see your hands." He puts his hands up in the air, still holding the cap. The officers at this point have their guns raised and pointed at him. Once he sees this, natural human instinct like, yo, why is there a gun pointed at me? He flinches to try and go back behind the fridge and take cover. It's once again an almost instinctual response to having several pairs of guns drawn and pointed at you. Now, as he attempts to retreat behind the fridge, the first barrage of shots opens up. An officer fires 4 rounds, striking him a few times. He falls to the ground and begins writhing, puts his hands up in the air again, screaming out like, wait. My hands are up. They're screaming hands. As he's on the ground, hands up in the air, they unleash another barrage of shots, striking him some more. His body, you can see it jerking around from each time a bullet strikes him. He then, once again, this is off pure adrenaline, having been shot several times now, rolls on the ground, still writhing, still trying to keep his hands up. What I think bothered me almost the most was the fact that even though he was being shot to death, his presence of mind was still to keep his hands in the air to try and prevent them from shooting him some more. What else can I do? I'm trying to comply. And the final volley of shots, as he rolls over on the ground, hands up, writhing a third time, is what causes him to finally go limp. And as I said, I don't ever like to bring myself to the point of watching these videos, but it just so happened that This video, it starts off so quickly, the action ramps up within a few seconds of the body cam footage starting, that once I was in there, it was just like, okay, wow. And it was a reminder of why I don't watch those videos. But once again, I don't know. It's hard to know what to say. When I say once again, like, I'm almost at a loss for words, because I don't know how we can sustain this level of inhumanity between state actors when it comes to law enforcement officers and the general public. This is not a sustainable model of policing or social order, whatever you want to call it. You can't keep this up. It won't be able to. At a certain point, the citizenry is going to reach a breaking point. And I only say that because in every instance like this, where the officers are undercharged and then not convicted, or not charged at all, not punished at all, you erode away the public trust between that institution and the general public. You erode that trust away. And we have seen it happen now thousands of times. You know how many times these incidents take place where we just don't hear about it inside of like the national news? It only makes the national news when there's a push for it. We wouldn't have known that Qadry Sanders was shot up had his family not pushed and pushed and pushed until an activist like a Shaun King, having received the family's blessing in the video footage, put it out there for millions of people to see. The Oklahoma Police Department, while it did fire the officers, they were dragging their feet on charges and actually getting them filed and put away. And that's why, like I said, it's just hard to really describe the emotion, because to see someone's life get taken like that from them, to know that one of the officers had been investigated for shooting a black man to death earlier that year. That's the second person that officer killed. As I said, if you're a serial killer, man, if you want to be able to kill people with impunity and you have those tendencies and urges, sign up for law enforcement, because you can kill people, get a couple weeks vacation, and get back on the job. That's all that's been proven, is that the legal loophole to murder in America is to wear a badge, because it's almost impossible to get charged with murder when you're wearing it, and especially if you're in the line of duty. And so if you have those tendencies, those antisocial tendencies where you want to harm people, the best thing that you can do is join a law enforcement agency here inside America, especially a local police department, because then you're given a gun and a badge and the license to kill with relative impunity. The investigations are generally shams, and whenever they do have the investigations, it usually finds the officer did no wrongdoing, because the laws are so egregiously set against the public, especially against the black public, that short of the officer, as I said, shooting you in the back, and even then, that is not a guarantee. That was one instance where an officer was convicted for shooting someone in the back. There's been other cases where officers have shot someone in the back and no charges are filed, no punishment is handed down. And so here we are again at a crossroads where you have a Patrick Lyoya who immigrated over here from the Congo and then found himself murdered, shot in the back of the head by a Michigan police officer. And you have a situation with a Qadry Sanders who, although I will admit that this young man was in the wrong to start off the situation, that does not mean that he deserved to be executed when he was clearly attempting to surrender. To be clear, because there will be people that latch on to the fact that, well, he was in the wrong to start with, and say, well, you put yourself in that situation, you get what you get. And it's like, no, that is not justice. That is insanity. And this all kind of reflects back to what I spoke about last week when I said in these culture wars where they work to train the empathy out of even kids, where here in Florida, social emotional learning that teaches you to empathize with your classmates, to accept others and the differences that they have, it's being banned because it's indoctrinating kids. What they're really trying to do is strip a generation of empathy, because when you don't empathize with others, when it's hard for you to look at someone who maybe doesn't have the same skin color and feel for their humanity, then things like this can be perpetrated and perpetuated without any kind of backlash from the public. Because if people don't care about their neighbors, if people don't view their black neighbors as human as they are, if they don't view their human rights the same, if they don't have the kind of empathy that would allow you to look at a person and say they don't deserve to be gunned down like that, then you can continue to do these things unchecked. And so we're back in familiar territory again now, where these two young men, one who immigrated over into this country and one who, once again, while he may have started out in the wrong, both of them should still be alive. Neither of them are alive, because this sick game that continues to be perpetuated. Whereas a young black man, you can't do right or wrong, where if you exist inside of your house, word to Tatiana Jefferson or Botham Shamjan, you can be killed by an officer and your justice is delayed or denied. Like, this is the game that's being played with people's lives. And we are unfortunately back in that same place again, where in the news cycle, you have some egregious police killings that weren't talked about until months after the fact. And we're only finding out that the officers are being prosecuted because of the fact that there is now some national or regional outcry over the egregious nature of the taking of these lives. My proposed solution is there needs to be an overhaul completely of law enforcement in terms of the rules and regulations governing them. There cannot be inside oversight by law enforcement. When it comes to these police shootings, there needs to be an independent review board that has zero ties to the law enforcement community. No relatives, friends, anything like that. There needs to be some kind of third-party arbitration that can take place where it can be looked at and not, oh, well, based on these certain rules that allow officers to just take lives. Those rules need to be rewritten. The rules of engagement for officers when they're allowed to escalate and take people's lives need to be thrown out and completely rewritten. And moreover, when officers do these shootings, the local DA and all that should not be able to prosecute, because we already know the backlash and revenge that takes place from police departments, especially the inside whisperings of police unions, where if you are a DA that decides to go after prosecutors, and this is a shout out to Larry Krasner up in Philadelphia, the police have their ways of getting revenge on public officials that don't cooperate and comply. They can lose evidence, not do their work as fast, drag their feet. Like, there's all these little punishments built into the system to maintain the power that police departments and unions have accumulated over decades. And what we see now is we're at a point where it's like they take these lives, and they're only doing it because they know they're going to get away with it. Not that they can, but that they're going to. Well over 95% of police shootings are cleared. You know how insane that is? An officer is right 95% of the time. That's just hard to believe on its face when you're talking especially about life and death. That in all these instances where an officer took someone's life, they did the right thing. No, man, you can't sell those figures to the general public, but it's been going on for a while because it's built into the systems. They are ingrained and entrenched. 1 in every 3 municipal tax dollars goes towards police department budgets on average. Look at Orlando, LA, New York. Your tax dollars are going towards legalized and sanctioned murder. And if you're going to be paying high police officer salaries, high salaries for their commanding officers and whatnot, then there should be public accountability. It's the very least that can take place. If law enforcement wants to fix their reputation, especially among the black community, then there needs to be a total overhaul of the ways that they're allowed to interact with the black community. They should not be able to treat them like insurgents in Iraq. They should understand that they are servants here to protect these people from bad actors. I've already spoken and let you know, like, the police don't even do that job effectively anyways. You don't call the cops in the middle of a mugging. You call them after you've been robbed to let them know you've been robbed. And maybe if the guy's a serial robber, he gets caught. But far more often than not, when you call police to solve a crime, for murder, there's a 50% solve rate. A slight increase when you have like theft and armed robbery, because it's usually serial robbers committing those crimes. But I say all that to say we're back in the situation now where, and it never really changed, but we're right back at that point in the news cycle where we're seeing that police are still killing unarmed black people, black men. They're doing with relative impunity because local officials have passed and signed off on laws. They have these relationships with police chiefs and whatnot, where officers, they just get to kill with essential impunity. And to be honest, I don't know how we solve this issue because it's one that seems to be so deeply rooted and entrenched inside of our system of governance now that it's going to take a complete overhaul to change things around. But what do you think? Let me know. If you're listening to this on the live broadcast, get at one of our social media pages, or if you're watching this on YouTube, drop a comment. Let me know what you think about the fact that there is still no real oversight, and what do you think can or should be done to increase oversight of the police inside of this country to ensure that these deadly encounters at least see a marked decrease in their rate of occurrence so that officers will think twice before ending someone's life for no reason. Because as it stands right now, as I said, this is not a sustainable model of policing. And I think we are going to reach a breaking point. When it comes, I can't tell you exactly when, but what I can say is that you can kill some of the people some of the time, but you can't kill all the people all the time. Eventually, you're going to run out of bodies, and you're going to have some very pissed off citizens that are wondering why it is that law enforcement seems to be a legalized population control mechanism with the way that they're allowed to kill and kill and kill and face no kind of punishment when an officer decides to take someone's life in the line of duty without facing any real threat to their own. Anyways, that's it for that story. I don't want to dwell too long on that issue. Just wanted to let us all and remind us all that police killings of black people, black men, is still going on. It's not as though it ever stopped. It's just that now there's several more examples that have been egregious enough and caught on video, and the video was released to the public to where we can be made aware of the fact that these things even happen, because it's still happening right now. It's just that we don't always get access to the information. Anyways, we have more coming up, so stick around for more No Alter Egos. So let's get into our big story from this past week, which of course was that leaked internal draft memo from the Supreme Court detailing and outlining the majority opinion by conservative justices on the Supreme Court, which right now it stands at 6-3 on the 9-member panel. But from those justices, there's a majority opinion that it seems, and has been relatively confirmed to this point, they're getting ready to end and overturn the decision regarding Roe v. Wade and the legalization of abortion here in America. Now, since then, we've seen some people laying claim to stare decisis, which is just the decision by the Supreme Court to allow a previously ruled decision to stand up, to be upheld. Essentially, if the Supreme Court passed a ruling on it before, the rule and precedent almost is to respect that previous ruling, except in egregious cases. So, for example, Dred Scott, that decision in the future, even though it was made by the Supreme Court, was viewed as unconstitutional. Why on earth would we tell black people that, no, you're not citizens, you're people's property? Well, because back then that's how it was. And so from time to time, the Supreme Court, even with the existence of stare decisis, which is to, once again, just let those precedents stand, they've gone back and changed bad precedent here in the country. And what they've decided with this overturn, this coming overturn of Roe v. Wade, is that it was a bad precedent set in our country. So I've spoken about this issue before, not to extreme length on this channel or on this show, but we've spoken about the abortion issue from the sense that abortion, at least in my opinion, is a women's rights issue fundamentally. The access to a medical procedure that a woman should have access to. And then since then, there has been all types of philosophical arguments that are passed down about why it is that a woman should not have access to this medical service. It's been deemed murder, the killing and taking of human lives. There's all these things that they try to put on a spin. They even go back and point to the fact that Margaret Sanger, one of the founders of Planned Parenthood, really devised abortion and the service of abortion as a way to keep the black population low. It was a form of eugenics. And so they point out all these things to try and say, yo, abortion has always been bad. It was never good. And ever since the passage of Roe v. Wade, there's been this fight. And personally, you know what? I'm going to get into some of those details. So before Roe v. Wade, abortion was not fully legalized across this nation. And so if you lived in a state that didn't give you access to abortion, what was taking place is that back alley abortions were happening. Women's lives were being put in greater danger. And it wasn't as though people stopped seeking the service. It's just that now they had no legal channels by which to access it. After the passage of Roe v. Wade now, where legalized abortion was granted, where it was federally protected, that in no state in this country could you say that a woman cannot have access to an abortion, there was an immediate response, and then a deep-seated, well-funded plan put into place by the Catholic Church, by the conservative right wing of America, which at that point was morphing into the Republican Party, because it was still a period of transformation for our politics in the early 70s when Roe v. Wade was passed by the Supreme Court. We weren't really seeing Republicans as they are now. It was just beginning to emerge as their identity of being the hyper-conservative party. Of course, that was culminated with the election and the nomination of Ronald Reagan for president. And we've seen how it's metastasized since then into this, whatever the Republican Party is today and what it represents to American values, as it were. But there's been a concentrated effort, and I would highly recommend, I want to take some time at this point to point out and recommend to you that if you want to learn as much as you can about how the Catholic Church and the Republican Party, amongst others, have been working since the passage of Roe v. Wade, since the Supreme Court made abortion access legal in this country, I would recommend watching Reversing Roe. It's a documentary on Netflix. It's probably spiking in popularity right now with the announcement of last week's decision. But I want to make it clear that what was decided, what was leaked last week in this decision that the Supreme Court is getting ready to hand down is not some coincidence. Brett Kavanaugh is not a Supreme Court justice by coincidence. He was almost quite literally born and bred for the position. If you think about that, the kind of nepotism that exists where a young man can essentially be born into a family. It's like, yeah, one day he's going to be a Supreme Court justice, and we have the money and connections where no matter what, we can see to it that it happens. When you have situations like this, and then to have Clarence Thomas cynically come out and say people should deal with it, and that there's this eroding respect for our institutions, it's eroding because of players like him. It's this really sick troll almost on society. But here we are again, where women, their health care, and decisions that are made about what's going on inside their bodies literally is being legislated by men and by hyper-religious circles who claim this is not a political issue, it's a spiritual one. And yet they're using political means to control other people's lives and the decisions that they make. So let's talk about it a little bit. Let's go through each of the arguments point by point and see if they have any merit to them. So the argument that it's the murder of a human child. In fact, right now, especially in the wake of the knowledge of the passage or the forthcoming overturn and repeal of Roe v. Wade, there are trigger laws by several states throughout the country that are going to go into effect almost immediately. And in some of these laws, life is determined at having a heartbeat, 6 weeks. There are going to be a bunch of states that get ready to ban abortions after 6 weeks, which for a woman is just a 2-week late period. A lot of women don't even know that they're pregnant until they're further along. But life is classified as a heartbeat. So let's get it there. Inside of this country, if you are legally brain dead, meaning you have no real recognizable brain activity, even if you have a heartbeat, it is the legal right of those in charge of your estate, whether it's your spouse, a parent, whatever the case may be, they have the legal right to pull you off any kind of form of life support. They don't even really have to keep you on it, because once your brain is not functioning, the rest of your body essentially goes along with it. Even if your heart is still pumping, you are essentially a lifeless form. Even if you have some of the hallmarks of life, like a beating heart, if your brain's not working, you are considered brain dead in a persistent vegetative state, and legally, you are allowed to be taken off life support and die, because it's recognized that that's not an entire human life. That person is essentially now a husk with a beating heart. It's just the harsh scientific truth of it, right? It'd be one thing, and I think I wouldn't be as upset about the situation if the people pushing this narrative that every human life is valuable and that this life starts at a heartbeat and we need to protect every baby, if those people were just as gung-ho about providing the social safety nets to mothers who seek these services because they know they can't take care of a child that they may have inside of them. And so the best thing to do is to not even bring the child into the world, because adoption, when it comes to people who are orphaned, they are flooded with children. And there's a ton of people who still won't adopt, right? When it comes to our social safety nets, there's such a thing as school lunch debt, where if you're a child who is from a certain income level and whose parents can't constantly pay the public school system to feed you, you can incur a debt as a child for school lunch, for being fed at this institution that you're being sent to. When we think about the fact that the school to prison pipeline is a thing where there are certainly predictive factors that can now determine, especially depending on when and where a child is born, when you're talking about their socioeconomic status in the county they may live in, you can with a certain degree of accuracy predict whether or not that child is going to end up in jail. This is the kind of society that people are going to be forced to birth children into, right? Forget about the fact that all the other arguments when it comes to even cases, and I had a conversation with someone close to me about this who seems to be on the side of them banning abortion. We had a very heated discussion about it where I informed the person that despite their well wishes and intentions, where it's like, well, of course, in cases of rape and incest, it should be allowed. That is not what's going to be the case in many states. And so even the most valid argument that, oh, well, we're preserving life, and we hope that, well, even if we're going to force women to not be able to make their own choices, in the case of rape and incest, it should be allowed. But no, that's not going to be the case. There are a lot of laws around this country, the trigger laws that I was mentioning, where even in cases of rape and incest, a woman will still be forced to carry the birth through to term. To birth children into a society that as soon as it's out of the birth canal, as soon as they're out of the birth canal, then it's oh, welcome to the world. It's going to be hard. There are no safety nets put in place, and yet you want people to constantly birth these human beings out. But here's what I think it's really about. It's about keeping people in a forced cycle of generational poverty, because these abortion services, especially when they're provided in lower income areas, when you force a woman who already can't afford to have kids or to have more kids, to have another child, you're adding another mouth to feed and another expense. You're keeping someone trapped in poverty, because it becomes that much more difficult now to save money, to try and do something better, because there's another mouth to feed. And so then it goes back to the moral argument. Well, then why are you having sex unprotected and having a baby if you know that you can't afford another baby? Well, that's why people get condoms. It's this assault from all sides, right? So they don't want condoms in sex education and things like that to be taught. They claim they don't want to be in people's business, but they want to legislate people's sex lives. And they claim it's for the good of the mother, but in cases of rape and incest, or even if it's a threat to the mother's life, it's like, oh, well, that's God's will. And at every turn, there's an attack on just regular decency. I think it's about several things. One, legislating and exercising extreme levels of control over women's bodies and their decisions that they make for themselves and for their futures. Two, I think it's about keeping people trapped in generational levels of poverty. Whereas if you know that someone who can't afford to have kids is going to be forced to have another kid, they're going to be forced to take care of that child. They're going to have to. And if they can't, then guess what? Too bad on you. You shouldn't have opened up your legs. That is the reasoning and the argument behind this. And it's insane that we still are allowing this to be a thing in this day and age. But as I said, it's been over 50 years in the making now. So these arguments that somehow the child matters more, I call BS on that. Because if that was the case, then there'd be more childcare services provided. If you really cared about the kids, we would have paid maternal and paternal leave inside of this country, where parents can take the time to go and raise their newborns and infants after they've given birth. But we don't. We would have better school systems and access to childcare and daycare in this country, but we don't. Because the goal has nothing to do with saving children's lives or stopping the murder of unborn babies. It's all about keeping a segment of the population under control and having a workforce that's so in debt and in poverty that you have fresh heads to replace the ones that die or leave all the time. And that's just among other things. I call BS on the moral arguments for abortion, because in the wake of especially laws that are passed on a daily basis in this country, they are almost completely indefensible. Moreover, when I think about the fact that, especially as these laws are going to be passed, the rich are still going to have access to abortions. They're just going to fly their daughters out. You better believe if a senator's daughter gets pregnant and he doesn't want her pregnant, he's going to fly her to a state where abortion access is legal. She's going to get the procedure done and go home. It's once again all about keeping people that don't have the means to do something like that trapped in a birthing cycle. And even worse than that, what you're really saying is that we get to determine what you do in your private time. If you decide that you want to have sex with someone, guess what? We're going to be there too and say that should you get pregnant, you just have to live with it and deal with it. It's an interesting proposition, one that wields and exercises extreme control over women's bodies. But it is what it is. And there are a ton of women who are also in support of this from the Christian side. I think they are vastly outnumbered by the women who want freedom to choose and decide what they do with their bodies. But this is where we are right now as a country. As I said earlier, there's even more detail about just what has gone on behind the scenes to get to this point in the documentary Reversing Roe. And we finally reached the culmination and fruition of those efforts for over 50 years now to try and get this Supreme Court decision overturned inside of our country. So let me know what you think on this subject. Drop a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening into the live broadcast, reach out to us on Facebook or on Instagram on our page and let me know. Let me know what you guys think about this issue and about the fact that they're getting ready to overturn one of the most significant pieces of legislation in our nation's history that guaranteed women the access to safe reproductive health services, especially when it comes to something that has been demonized so much, but is literally a part of many women's reproductive health regimen in terms of them being able to dictate and decide the terms of motherhood for their own lives, what they're able to do with their own body, and especially in cases of rape, incest, or the actual literal health of the mother being affected. That's just baseline stuff where it's like, yeah, we should be able to terminate pregnancies right there. But if a woman wants to go out and have sex, it is not my place or anyone else's place to tell her that you cannot. And that if she gets pregnant, then you know what? You got to bring that baby to term into a country that's run. Like, when we think about the way our country is run, it's insane here. And yet we're telling people you're going to be forced to birth people into this insane world created by these insane people. You know, it's a bit laughable to me, but it is what it is. We're going to keep things moving here on No Alter Ego. So stick around. So our final story this week has to do with energy, fossil fuels, and ISDS. Now, for anyone who may not be aware of what ISDS is, it stands for Investor State Dispute Settlement. And why it's important is that it could represent one of the biggest legal roadblocks and challenges to a green energy future. So over the years, whether it's oil, natural gas, coal, these forms of energy that really were picked up in the 19th century and modernized going into the 20th century to where they became ubiquitous and a part of everyday life, they worked as they were growing industries to ingrain themselves into the local governance structure of all these places where their services were being provided and their resources were being used. One of the biggest treaties of such a nature was actually formed back in the early 90s in 1991. It's called the Energy Charter Treaty. This was signed by a ton of European countries, and it was basically put in place to ensure that these Western oil companies and energy giants that were making energy investments and trying to bring energy into these former Soviet bloc countries would be able to do so without having their energy assets taken back over or criminalized by those countries should the Soviet Union ever rise back to power, or should those countries just not want those Western interests there. And so essentially what they put into place was protections such that they cannot ever have their assets criminalized, made illegal, or made unprofitable. Essentially, what a lot of these, and the Energy Charter Treaty is just one of many. There are several hundred of them, at least 335 that I'm aware of, that are in countries around the world, whereby these energy companies have it so that their assets, including the actual energy assets, are legally protected to be profitable, such that we can't make it so that if we go carbon neutral, somehow oil and natural gas will become unprofitable. They've made it legally so that they have to remain profitable, or else the ISDS clause, the Investor State Dispute Settlement Clause, gets triggered. So anytime there's a law that's put in place now by a major country or even a smaller country seeking to curb their energy usage, there is a legal mechanism by which these outside energy companies that are investing into these states by bringing these energy assets can then sue to recover any damages that could occur. In fact, there are up to, and this is as of some more recent estimates, $2.4 trillion worth of energy assets that are currently protected, if not more, under some of these treaties. We're talking a case literally where these industries have woven themselves so much into the fabric that they have said that either our investments are allowed to continuously make money into perpetuity, or we get to sue and destabilize your government if you don't comply and keep our assets profitable. It's the same way like how private prisons here in America have these bed count amounts when they contract with states. They say you have to keep a certain amount of prisoners filled up. We have to have a certain occupancy rate or we get to sue you. It's very much a similar business model. And I wanted to bring it up before we close out the show because I think it's important for us to know and understand that one of the biggest hurdles standing in our way of getting to a sustainable energy future are these legalized mechanisms that trigger investor-state dispute settlements. It is not something that I think should be taken lightly, but it has been because it just hasn't been talked about enough. Where we are now, or where I am now, and wanted to pass on that information to you, I'm just now coming into greater understanding about the fact that even though we could have the best goodwill in the world, even if we want to have this bright and green energy future where we are using wind power and solar power to fuel the majority of our lives, these really large, almost endless energy sources, we're going to be stuck using fossil fuels for the foreseeable future for decades to come because they have written it legally into the underpinnings of so many nations and countries around the world. All of these treaties only serve one purpose, and that is to keep fossil fuel energy profitable going into perpetuity. It is to make sure that should there be any kind of loss or should the use of fossil fuels be made illegal, that they can then sue and recoup a ton of money from different states around the world should they ever decide that they don't want to be a player in the fossil fuel game anymore. And I think it's really important to highlight that to any and everyone that's listening or watching, because we need to know and understand the kind of battle that we're up against as we work to secure a better future for our kids, for their kids, and so on and so forth into the human future. And it's really important for us to, at the very least, be aware of the tactics that are being used by these companies and that have been used by these companies historically, especially something like the ECT or the Energy Charter Treaty, where it essentially makes it impossible. They're like ticks that have burrowed themselves now into the fabric of society, to where they get to say that we are making this money and we're going to continue to make this money. And if you try and stop us from making this money, then we get to sue your governments and take money from the taxpayer base to make up for any potential losses. I think it's egregious that they've been written. While the initial reasoning may make a little bit of sense, it's now put us in this almost impossible position. And so if you're wondering, especially why the Paris Agreement doesn't have more teeth, it's because there are other documents like the Energy Charter Treaty that have a ton of enforcement provisions, actually have some teeth to them. And so my fear, and just something that I want to just point out to you guys, is that we won't be able to achieve that green energy future that we want to achieve unless these charters and treaties are made null and void, unless we can stick it to the energy industry in their current iteration and say, no, find a better way to fuel daily life. Until then, we're going to be stuck essentially having to pay them through the nose for the privilege of using their services that are slowly killing our planet. Anyways, we have what I'm reading coming up next, as well as the Tech Talk Minute and the final thought before we close out here on No Alter Ego. So stick around. So what I'm reading this week is just a continuation and the end of Operation Gladio by Paul L. Williams that I spoke about last week. This book has been a revelatory eye-opener for me. And you don't stop and think about, exactly what goes into why the world is the way it is today, right? While it's something that I like to think about, it's not always easy to come across those answers because you begin to realize the deeper that you dig around, just how complex the web of interconnectivity between governments, organized criminal groups, and religious organizations can go. Operation Gladio is an excellent example of overreach by some of the most powerful people in society to essentially impose their will on a larger section of the population. If you have not had a chance to check this book out, it contains reasons why the Pope was almost assassinated, why they did attempt to assassinate Pope John Paul II, and how they had a cover story all ready to go that they were implementing and putting into place for months before the assassination attempt even took place. And that's just one of the many events and occurrences inside of Operation Gladio, where it points out how carefully and systemically over the course of decades, the CIA, the Catholic Church, and the Italian and Sicilian mafias really worked to exercise control over a ton of European states and even here in America, as well as the CIA ran drugs into minority communities using the mafia at first. I mean, it goes deep, people. And this is only one example. There are others that I can think of. You think about Operation Fast and Furious, where it was discovered that the Attorney General, this is back during the Obama administration, they were running guns to Mexico. Like, States have consistently partnered up with criminal cartels, and they never tell us about it. And they pretend as though they're in this fight, this war against drugs and evil. And what this book really just reminded me is that a lot of the people that are running the show are on the same side, even if they pretend to be on different ones. So I would highly recommend it. Operation Gladio. Excellent, excellent, excellent read. It's out now on the Audible platform by Paul L. Williams. You can also get a hard copy on Amazon. I'm going to post a link to that down in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening in live, feel free to reach out to us and I can send a copy of that. Or just look it up on Audible. It's called Operation Gladio. That's Gladio. Fun fact, Gladio is actually the name of the sword, the short sword that was used by gladiators inside of the Roman Colosseum. But Operation Gladio, excellent book detailing just some really shady acts carried out over the course of decades by these three organizations, the effects of which are still rippling right now through time. But that's enough of that. Let's get into our Tech Talk Minute before we get to our final thoughts. Stick around for more. No alter egos. So for our Tech Talk Minute this week, I want to make it really quick and short. It has to do with the company Peloton. A lot of you are probably aware of Peloton as being those fancy-looking exercise bikes and treadmills that these slim, really fit-looking people are riding in these commercials for the holidays where they're exercising and pushing their bikes onto you as the newest way for you to get healthy and fit and stay in shape. And this is really a cautionary tale about the greed exercised by some corporations. Now, I spoke last week about the subscription model and why it was so bad. And this week is the perfect example. As Peloton is, I'm not going to say they're in a full-on death spiral right now as a company, but they really are trying to figure out how they're going to survive as a company. And it's an excellent cautionary tale in that we saw that Peloton was a company that went from advertising these really overpriced exercise bikes to then charging people for the privilege of being able to use their already expensive gym equipment, to the point where if you weren't subscribed to them, you wouldn't really be able to use your exercise equipment. So you have a $4,000 piece of art inside of your house. And now we're seeing the full-on fallout from those horrible practices. And I just wanted to point out the cautionary tale out there. There are a lot of tech companies that abuse the power of subscription models, that become greedy about what it is that they're actually trying to do and provide as services to their clients. They just see their clients as money-making machines as opposed to people that are looking for a good or service that's going to help enhance their life. And I wanted to point it out today because I almost believed in Peloton as a company at one point in time, up until they started making those subscription-based changes, trying to force users essentially to pay them more money, pay them through the nose to just be able to use equipment that they had purchased. I thought it was a horrible move then. I still think it's a horrible move now. And I think that the fallout from it is very much justified. But I want to speak to that again, that for every tech company out there that is selling you a dream, be careful of what they're trying to do on the back end. Because as we've seen with Peloton, it could just be that they're trying to sucker you into a potential lifestyle and then have their hands in your pockets into perpetuity. And I, for one, will always remain against that method of business operation. We're going to keep things moving, though, now to our final thought. So stick around for more No Alter Egos. So my final thought this week that I want to offer to you guys is stay ready so you don't have to get ready. This past weekend, I witnessed something phenomenal at the Kentucky Derby. Rich Strike, an 80-1 underdog that was not even in the field up until last Friday. He did not qualify for the race and was only added as an alternate. He came from the literal back of the pack to win the Kentucky Derby. As I saw that, it inspired something inside of me, which is that this horse had no idea he'd be running the biggest race of his life right now. As I said, up until last Friday, about 8 a.m. in the morning, the horse was not a part of the event. It was like a sub, but it wasn't until one of the horses pulled out of the race that Rich Strike was able to qualify and be put into the field for the Kentucky Derby. Watching the race from the start, he started from one of the worst positions over in the very last stall on the left, and for the majority of the race up until their turn through the final quarter of the race, he was in the back of the pack before making one of the most legendary charges to the front that I have ever witnessed with my two eyes. And it inspired within me the thought that if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. I looked at this horse and this jockey who were called up very, very like the definition of last minute to one of the most major moments of their lives. And to see the way that they responded was an inspiration to me to make sure that no matter what your ambitions and hopes for yourself are, don't just have those ambitions and hopes sitting inside of you. Take the active steps to be ready at all time so that when opportunity presents itself, you can maximize on that opportunity, much like Rich Strike did this past weekend at the Kentucky Derby. That is my hope for you as you go through this week, is that you will continue to hone whatever dreams you have for yourself. Continue to work on them. Build yourself in them, even if it's doing one small thing a day. Because when you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. When you stay ready and opportunity presents itself, you can change your life. As you go through this week, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Take care of yourselves and those around you. Show love to your fellow man. And as always, God bless.
Looking in the mirror, I know I'm imperfect, just like everybody else I know. Most times I wish the world looked beneath the surface, but I guess that's how life goes. Had to learn to love myself this time around. Pop a bottle and then take a sip just because. Book a flight and then take a trip just because. Love myself just because.